Welcome to Reclaiming Me, a trauma-informed podcast helping women with complex PTSD heal the lasting impact of childhood attachment wounds from parents and caregivers, so you can finally release people-pleasing and perfectionism and learn to trust in relationships, beginning with the one you have with yourself. I'm your host, Cindy Payne, therapist, trauma specialist, and a woman who has walked this path both personally and professionally.
I want to ask you something before we get started, and I want you to actually sit with it rather than just moving past it. When was the last time something good happened? Something that you worked for, something that took real courage or real effort, and you let yourself fully feel good about it? Not for a second before the but arrived. Not halfway, where simultaneously cataloging everything still undone, but fully, without immediately explaining it away or shrinking it or waiting for someone else to confirm that it counted. Take a moment, really think about it. If you are a CPTSD survivor, I would be willing to bet that the answer is either a very long time ago or you genuinely cannot remember. And I want to talk about why that is today, because I think it is one of the quieter, less discussed wounds of complex trauma, and it is really costing us something very real. Today, we are talking about celebrating small wins without the guilt and the shame. And I know that might sound on the surface like a lighter topic than some of what we have covered in the past. But I want to tell you that in my clinical experience and in my own lived experience, the inability to receive what we have genuinely earned, to let joy land, to let a win really count, to feel good about ourselves without immediately pulling the rug out from underneath that feeling. This is one of the most persistent and painful patterns that I see in trauma survivors. And it is a deeply connected feeling to everything that we have been talking about in recent episodes. And so here is what I hope that you walk away with after listening to today's episode. And that is number one, that CPTSD survivors, we are wired by our trauma histories, which lends itself to minimizing accomplishments and moving the goalposts rather than pausing and just receiving it. And this is another one of those really sneaky survival adaptations, and it has a real cost. Number two, joy and celebration can feel genuinely dangerous when you grew up in an environment where being too happy, too proud, or too visible had consequences. The nervous system learns to preempt that danger by keeping the good feelings like really small and very brief. And number three, letting our wins land is a skill. It is learnable, though. That's the good news. And it begins not with this big grand gesture of self-celebration, but with the smallest possible practice of staying with the good feeling one breath longer than you normally would. Okay, so let's just dive right into the content. In this first part, I want us to really get close up to this pattern and understanding where it comes from. So let me tell you what this has looked like across different seasons of my own life, because I think that naming the specific shapes of this matters. And there have been professional moments, the podcast growth, the practice building, the move to California that represented something that I had genuinely worked towards, where the win would arrive and I would feel it for approximately like 30 seconds at best before my brain was already on to the next thing. What still needs to happen? Or what could go wrong here? What other people have that I don't yet? The win would land, and then I would almost immediately be in motion again, as if staying still with the good feeling was somehow dangerous. And I'm still working through this. Okay. So let's not get any ideas that this is completely fixed and healed. This is my ongoing life work to do, is to feel that joy is my birthright, to feel that joy is an act of resistance against things, people, places that tell me that I do not deserve to feel it and to own it and to live it. And there have been personal growth moments. So breakthroughs again in my own therapy, shifts in my own healing that I had worked towards for years, where I would notice the shift and then I would immediately minimize it. Well, I still have so far to go. Again, it's not like I have this all figured out. Other people have done so much more work than me. That's the story that I get stuck in sometimes, as if the only wins that counted were the final wins, as if the journey didn't deserve any acknowledgement at all. And there have been parenting moments. Ooh, gosh, this is a tender one for me. Watching my sons become the people that they are becoming, where I would feel a flash of something like pride and then almost instantly feel guilty or ashamed for it, as if celebrating their growth meant that taking credit for something that wasn't mine to take, as if my own role in their lives was just too complicated to let myself feel good about without immediately adding a disclaimer. And I notice across all of these threads a few common patterns. And the first pattern is what I call moving the goalposts. The win arrives, and instead of just really being in a place to receive it, I immediately redefine what counts as a win so that this particular one no longer qualifies. And I recognize when I'm doing it most of the time now, which makes it even more frustrating, but I'm working on it. The second one is the waiting room. Okay. It's the sense that I need someone else's validation before I am allowed to feel good about something myself. And the third is the immediate shadow. The way the list of everything still undone arrives almost before the win has finished landing, swallowing it whole. Do any of these sound familiar to you? And if they do, rest assured there is a pattern, and we can locate where those patterns come from. And I want to be really clear that this is not about blame. Okay. It is about understanding, because understanding is what makes this change possible. For me, someone who grew up in a home shaped by complex trauma, celebrating, being visibly proud, taking up space with my joy, declaring that something I did was good and worthy of acknowledgement, this was not safe for me. Because at times it was met with criticism. Sometimes it was minimized by the adults around me. Sometimes I felt that being too happy or too visible made me a target. And I often watched other people in my family shrink their own joy. And I learned by watching that this is just what you did. I was simply never taught how to receive goodness, how to be in my joy, because the adults who raised me, I'm not really sure if they knew either how to do this. I mean, my grandfather was this really larger than life, playful being. And I loved that about him. And I'm so grateful that I had him in my life to model that playfulness, but also being a highly sensitive, highly perceptive child growing up, I knew it was a felt sense that there was this underlying heavy cloak of sadness and grief and loss in my home. And so sometimes playfulness almost maybe felt like a way that we masked the things that we weren't really able to talk about in my family. And so what did I do? I adapted. I learned to keep the good feelings, the wins, the joy, the playfulness really small and brief. I learned to preempt the criticism by criticizing myself first. So that was a way that you could not hurt me. If I could just go ahead and get to what I did wrong and do it through like a really funny, self-deprecating way, then you could not hurt me. I learned to stay in motion. I learned to keep achieving. I learned to be exceptional and to never quite arrive anywhere that felt stable enough to rest in, because rest in my nervous system's memory was often when things went wrong again. And in the words of my therapist, you did not know how to be held in your joy, held in your playfulness, held in your wins, held in your creativity, held in just being you. So Dr. Rick Hansen, a neuropsychologist who writes beautifully about the brain and well-being, he describes what he calls as the negativity bias. This is the brain's evolutionary tendency to register negative experiences more strongly and to hold them longer than the positive ones. He says that the brain is like Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good. And for trauma survivors, this bias is not just evolutionary. This bias is trained. So when you have spent years practicing the skill of registering threat and minimizing safety, when you feel joy, real embodied received joy, it can register as threatening when your nervous system has learned that good things don't last and the other shoe is always somewhere above you. And again, this has been really explored on a deeper level by myself whenever it would come up in therapy. And I would want so deeply to be able to embrace all the good that was happening in the moment, but I would immediately shut it down because it didn't feel safe. And I was so grateful to my therapist for being able to name that for me, that it is far riskier to be in my joy than it is in my pain, but that we could change that. And I've talked about Dr. Kristen Neff here before, whose work on self-compassion I return to now pretty consistently. And she talks about how we would never treat a good friend the way we treat ourselves when something good happens. So if a friend told us about a win, something that they worked really hard for, something that took courage, hopefully, if we were doing our own work, we would be able to celebrate it with them. We would tell them that it mattered. We would not immediately say, but what about all the things you haven't done yet? We wouldn't ignore them altogether and not celebrate their personal win unless we were struggling so deeply with our own envy and our own self-worth. And yet that is exactly what most of us do to ourselves. So I want to get into a little bit more of why joy feels dangerous, because I think that this is a part that is most important and least talked about. And for many CPTSD survivors, again, joy itself, not just pride or celebration, but the raw experience of feeling good, can activate the nervous system in a way that feels almost like a threat. And again, this is not metaphorical. This is physiological. Okay. So when we experience something that feels genuinely good, a win, a moment of connection, a flash of pride or pleasure. The nervous system has this way of shutting down. The nervous system has to be able to tolerate that state. It has to be able to stay in what Dan Siegel calls the window of tolerance, that regulated, integrated, remember, middle place, without immediately either shutting it down or escalating into anxiety about losing it. And for those of us whose nervous systems were shaped in environments where good things were followed by bad things, where calm preceded chaos, where happiness was interrupted, where visibility led to criticism, and that's huge. The experience of joy can actually trigger a kind of anticipatory dread. So the good feeling arrives and the nervous system says, wait, this is when it all goes wrong. This is when the other shoe drops. Don't get too comfortable. Don't take up too much space with this. Don't let yourself need this because it won't last. And so what do? We preempt the loss by not fully receiving the win in the first place. And this is not irrational. It is, again, a learned adaptation. It's a very sophisticated piece of self-protection. And like all of our adaptations, it served us at one point in time. It kept the disappointment manageable. It kept us from being too visible, too proud, too much, which in some homes was genuinely the safer choice. I can remember winning an award in high school, and I was so proud to win this award. It was a pretty selective process, and when I earned it, I couldn't wait to tell my grandparents about it. And I remember not the nitty-gritty details of the conversation, but I remember the overall theme. And there was a phrase that maybe some of you can relate to, and the phrase goes something like this: don't get too big for your britches, which in the South, that means don't be too proud. Don't let them see you feel happy about the acceptance of this. Because if you got too big for your britches, then that means that other people were going to look at you as not a humble person. Another common phrase that I would hear often if I was expressing a need or a desire, my grandmother would say, "Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are?" And again, I do not fault her anymore like I used to, because I know that she learned that, that like, who are you to ask for what you need? Because she grew up in a time where children were to be seen and not heard. So you better not have a desire. You better not show that you are proud of what you had accomplished. But now in adulthood, in our healing and the lives that we are trying to build, it is keeping the good things from landing. It is really keeping us in this perpetual state of this almost arrival. And that is a real cost and a real loss. And it really deserves our attention. So let's get into what it looks like to let your wins land. And I want to be honest with you here. I am not someone who has mastered this. I am someone who is practicing it. I am fumbling my way through it. And some days the practice is really small and very imperfect. And that just has to be enough. And so what that looks like for me is accepting compliments. I used to be so bad at this, and I'm not super great at it yet, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. So when someone would compliment me, I would get so squirmy. I would be so visibly uncomfortable, and I would often deflect it, or I would minimize it, or I would launch into an explanation about why I didn't deserve that, or why it was just luck, or oh, it was no big deal, because I was raised, again, to learn to downplay it, that to just say, thank you so much, would mean something about my character, and it wasn't good. And also, I have been in relationships in both my childhood and my adulthood where I have received backhanded compliments, and again, that has to do with our episode last week on jealousy and envy, where I would receive a compliment from somebody, but it was done in this kind of way that had like a cutting edge to it, like, ugh, of course you can wear that. Or, yeah, like you don't have to worry about that. Like, look at you. And I think that the other person was trying to be complimentary, but it felt like shame. And that's a really tough place to be, to sit on the receiving end of something like that, because we know what's going on. And especially if you're working hard on receiving things and feeling worthy of things. And, if it's tied up in your image and the internal struggle that comes with that sometimes, that just feels really gross and can set you back. But also, it's a real clear indicator, again, of it doesn't have anything to do with you. It has everything to do with the other person. And so if you can continue to do your work on that and get clear about that, it can have a way of not landing as difficult as it did before. So here's what I've learned, both in my own healing and in sitting with clients who are actually really doing the work. And the first is that when you can let a win land, it doesn't require a grand gesture. It does not require a party or a proclamation or even telling anyone about it at all. It can just require something small and much harder, in my opinion, which is to stay with the good feeling for a few extra breaths before your brain moves on. And that's just it, just the staying. So not immediately rushing to the next thing or the next worry or the next item on the list of reasons that this doesn't quite count yet. And when we can learn to stay in this, Dr. Kristen Neff calls this the act of savoring, which is the practice of deliberately staying with a positive experience long enough for them to register in the body. And this is not manufacturing positivity. This is not toxic positivity. It's just not abandoning the good feeling before it has had a chance to actually land. And I'm guilty of not really being able to savor. I can remember when my kids were little and I would tuck them into bed at night and they would be asleep and I would look at their faces and I would just be in awe, like, oh my God, my body held you at one point and I birthed you and you came into this world and you are healthy and you are safe and you are having experiences as a child that I didn't have the privilege of having. And this is so good. Like everything right now in this moment is pure wonder, awe, blissful. And then immediately I would have this horrible feeling of dread. Like, oh my God, what if you don't wake up tomorrow? Or what if something horrible happens to them? And then I would be like, golly, why can't you just stay in this? Like why does my brain have to go to this horrible scenario? And I didn't understand that it was just an adaptation, right? And Brene talks about when you're in these places of joy and awe and wonder, if you can savor it with gratitude, then you can get into a more consistent practice of just being able to be with it, to say, thank you. Thank you for this. Because the truth is, I don't know what's coming tomorrow, but I can be in this right now. I can deserve the feeling of landing in the goodness. And the second thing is noticing the guilt and the shame when it arrives. And instead of shutting it down, see if you can get curious about it rather than immediately obeying what the guilt and shame is telling you to do. So when you feel the pull to minimize or deflect or move on, just pause for a moment and ask, where did I learn that this win wasn't enough? Whose voice is telling me to keep moving? What am I afraid will happen if I let myself just feel good about this in this moment? Because almost always there's an answer to those questions. And almost always the answer predates you. It belongs to a home or a relationship or an environment that taught you something about your worth that was never actually true. And the third thing is what I think of as witnessing yourself. And this is something that I do in my own practice, and then I invite my clients into it when they are ready. And when you are witnessing yourself, it's really just simply the practice of saying out loud to yourself or to a therapist or to a trusted person who's earned that right to be in that space in your life, or maybe a journal, what the win actually was and what it cost you to get there. Not to brag, not to perform, but to bear witness to your own effort, to give it the dignity of being seen, even if only by yourself. And if you struggle to do this, I would say you're not alone as a CPTSD survivor. And starting to bear witness to yourself is a great place to begin. And I will say this, you have to be very discerning in who you do this with. So I would not do this with a person who has not earned that spot in your life. I would not do this with someone who cannot celebrate your individual wins without being prompted, because there's some envy or some jealousy floating around in there. So that is dangerous, because if I try to, say out loud what the win was and what it cost me to get there, and then it's received by a backhanded compliment, or maybe it's just ignored altogether, then that really tells me what I need to know about that other person, but also about what I choose to share and not share with that person. It has to be a person that can receive that and can truly cheer you on from a place of genuine joy. And I will also say that, especially for women, this is rare. And I really hate that. I really do. I wish that more women could be in each other's corners, like truly cheering each other on, because we need that. We need that as women. We are a marginalized group, and we have been taught and conditioned to not take up space in that area of our lives. And I just think that's so detrimental to our growth. And I've never really understood that. When my friends are experiencing a win, I, of course, at times have maybe felt some envy, like, gosh, I really want that. And I'm also so happy for them. But if I don't check myself first, that can be really hard, But again, I'm a person that, like, I want so much for my friends. I want so much for others to heal and to grow and to thrive. So I've just always really had a very difficult time with that, because, as Brene says, these are not the type of people that are good stewards of your story, right? They just haven't earned the right. They haven't done their own work. So just be really careful with that when you're talking about inviting people into your life to be witnesses, that these are behaviors that have to be shown to you over time, that other people are genuinely for you. Because so much of what trauma steals from us is the experience of being seen, of having our effort and our growth and our courage acknowledged by someone who mattered. And so while we cannot go back and give this to our younger selves, we can begin to give it to ourselves now in really small, quiet, imperfect ways, one win at a time. So let's come back to where we started. Number one, CPTSD survivors are wired to minimize wins and move the goalposts. And this is not a character flaw. This is an adaptation for survival. And it was learned in environments where joy maybe was unsafe, where visibility had consequences, and where the good things just didn't last. And it has a real cost. Number two, joy can feel genuinely dangerous when your nervous system has learned to associate the good feelings with what came after them. So the preemptive shrinking, the immediate shadow, the waiting room for validation. These are all ways of protecting yourself from a loss that your nervous system is certain is coming. And understanding this is the beginning of changing it. And number three, letting wins land is a skill. It starts very small. It starts with staying one breath longer. And it starts with noticing the guilt and the shame and getting curious instead of immediately obeying it. It starts with bearing witness to your own effort, because your effort has always, always been worth witnessing. So as we close, something that is coming up a lot in my own life right now is this season of big transitions. I have talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast. I promise there's going to be an end to it whenever this move takes place. But it is the practice for me of letting these good things actually count, of not moving immediately to what's next or what's not done or what could go wrong. And folks, let me tell you, this is hard. This is so hard. It is genuinely daily hard for me. But it is also one of the most healing things that I know to do right now. So if this landed for you today, I really do want to hear about it. And send in your questions for the Ask Me Anything CPTSD episode coming later this summer. I might put it in a 2-part series depending on the number of questions I get. So you can DM me at Cindy Payne Rooted on Instagram, or you can email me, and both links are in the show notes. And just a little heads up that the midweek reframe this week is going to take us into the criticism thread, specifically the inner critic that started as someone else's voice, and give you one reframe and one practice to begin unhooking from it. So I hope you'll come back and join me for that. In the meantime, take really good care of yourselves and celebrate those small wins. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you leave feeling a little lighter, a little more grounded, and a little closer to trusting yourself and your inner experience. If this episode resonated with you, please follow or subscribe so future conversations can meet you when they're needed. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. That's one of the ways this work reaches the people who need it the most. You can find me on Instagram at Cindy Payne Rooted, and you can also visit me at cindypayne.com, where you'll find all episode links, blog posts, practice updates, and a free people-pleasing style quiz designed to help you notice your patterns with more compassion. And remember, every small step towards healing, self-trust, and presence matters. You are worthy of this journey. Thanks, everyone.